Hi everybody, we are in for a treat because to have Dr. Carolyn Leaf here, thank you for being a part of this. You're all over the world.
Yes.
So to have you here in Tacoma to be with us is a special occasion. And this is your new book, Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess.
Yes.
That's number 19.
Yes.
And this is number 18, 101 ways to be less stressed. These ought to be like, we ought to just send them to every house in Tacoma. The last year, has your work changed because now everybody knows we're in unusual times.
Yes.
Has it changed the nature of your work, or are people just paying more attention?
I think that the latter. People are paying more attention. People want answers. People are not satisfied with how mental health in general has been approached, and people have become much more authentic and real, and realize that you can't hide from issues, and we need a way of managing it. We really do need to be able to cope with the issues of life, and we can't keep running around and being busy and hoping things will go away. And it's definitely made people think deeper. So in terms of my work, well, obviously we couldn't travel for a year, so we did a lot of Zoom technology, conferencing. Now we're back in person, which is great. But people, the awareness, the insight, the hunger has grown, which is fantastic.
Is social media making, when you say your mental mess, is it making us more messy? I don't think it's helping.
Well, I think it's a combination. It's a really good tool to communicate, and as humans, we love any tool that we can use to communicate. But like anything, humans do we make wrong choices with things. So if anything misused is not going to help people, and there's been so much misuse. So when people, hide behind social media to bully others and that kind of thing, that's not the healthy side.
Yeah.
But there's also a really healthy side of it too. So it's a matter of managing it.
Right.
And that's what I talk about throughout all my work, is helping people to manage their mind, because your mind never stops and it's always going. So if you don't manage it, it's messy, and a messy mind's a messy brain, messy body, messy life. No matter what you do, no matter what tools
I love that
apply.
sequence. Say it one more time.
So messy mind, messy brain, messy body, messy life.
And you separate.
Yes.
It's important. You separate mind and brain.
Oh, absolutely. Totally.
Yeah, talk about that, because I've heard you talk about it before, and I love the distinction, because people just think their brain is the same as their mind.
Exactly. And it's very much been the last 40 years that people have begun to think like that. And it's because of the advances in neuroscience, where we've become so focused on the brain.
Yeah. This is your little.
There you go. There's my little model of the brain that I carry everywhere. So here's a human brain, not a real one. But essentially, our understanding of the human brain has dramatically increased in the last 40 years. Right. But it's made our lifestyles become, well, not even lifestyles, it's made the philosophies become more neurocentric. So everything's about brain.
The wiring,
the brain made you do it, everything's brain. Back in the 80s, there was still a separation between mind and brain, and there is still a separation, but the discussions were around, you have a mind and you have a brain, and they work together. And then we moved into this very neurocentric era where it was your brain. So if you're feeling sad, well, your brain made you do it. If you this, your brain made you do it. Everything's about brain. And although the brain's extremely important, if you and I were dead now, our brain would be disintegrated, it wouldn't do anything. But the fact that we're sitting here talking and alive and having this conversation and responding, if I had to link your brain now up to some QEEG technology, which is the technology I use for my neuroscience studies, we would see tremendous activity in your brain. You would see lots of frequencies, you'd see a tremendous amount of activity happening across the brain, but a lot across this frontal part of the brain, because we're having this deep conversation. Mm-hmm. But if you were dead, you wouldn't see anything. Right. So mind is what we're seeing. We're picking up mind. So mind is the driving force. It's the power that actually drives the brain and drives the body. No mind, brain and body disintegrate. Right. So mind is our aliveness. It's our phenomenal ability.
Is it the same as your soul?
I always define mind as spirit and soul, the combination, because obviously there's levels. And when you study mind, you'll see that there's different levels. And I talk about that in my work as well. You have your conscious level, which we're operating in now when you're awake. But we've also, right now, our non-conscious, N-O-N, is also operating. So the non-conscious mind operates 24/7. And the non-conscious is really our deep spiritual level. It's where all of our thoughts, and which are made of memories, from the time that we were a certain age in the womb, are basically built. It's the driving force. It's the trying to restore balance part of us. It's the wisdom part of us. It's the mixture of the wisdom plus the other, all our experiences, cultural beliefs, etc., etc. And that drives us, and that never stops. So when you're sleeping at night, your conscious mind goes to sleep, but your non-conscious never stops.
Yeah.
And so it's always going. So
right, it's processing.
it's always processing, but it's also holding the results of our processing. So right now we're discussing, we're processing, the people listening to us are receiving these words and built with their mind. How do you receive this? What's happening here?
Yeah.
We're using our minds
Interpreting.
to think, feel, choose, yes. And we take this, so we take these words and these visuals and these energy fields, because that's what these are. I'm generating sound waves, and so are you, and electromagnetic light waves, and all of that's taken.
There's a lot going on.
It's a lot. It's a huge amount, and that all goes into our brain because of our mind. Our mind is grabbing everything, putting it into the brain in order to create a way that we can then express what we see. So the brain becomes the sort of relay station and the responder to how we experience life.
What's fascinating about your work, and I read one of your early books, is that I think people, they engage with you as if you're a psychologist, but you're not. You're a scientist.
Yeah.
And when someone says a neuroscientist, that's not touchy-feely. You're studying actual processes. Am I saying that right?
Yes, you are. No, you're quite correct. So the degrees, the combination of degrees I've done, and I've done a whole sort of series of degrees, trained me up to be a clinical neuroscientist and also cognition and cognitive neuroscientist, and then also communication pathologist. So what that means is that I have been trained to look at what people, and then my research has obviously developed this further, and look at what people are saying and doing, like you and I are showing up in whatever way in our life, and then tracking that back to understand why I am thinking like that. What is the source, and how did I get there? And if it's working for me, great, grow it. But if it's not, what do you need to fix? So it's looking at the external and tracking it back to what actually created that, and then rewiring it, changing it in your mind, and then rewiring it in the brain. Because if there's a trauma that's driving you, and you are operating very much in a flight and fright mode, or freeze mode, or whatever, one of the trauma responses, then there's and it's affecting your relationships and your work, and it may be kind of subtle, but it's there, it's a pattern, and it's affecting how you're functioning.
Yes.
You've got to take that pattern and you've got to deconstruct that and reconstruct.
It's a little bit of archaeology.
It is a bit of archaeology from a very scientific perspective.
Yeah.
So science is that process. So we're all little scientists in a sense, because we can't control what's coming up, and we can't control people. But we can control our responses. So everything's very much an experiment. Like this conversation's an experiment. We don't know exactly what's going to come out of the conversation. Sure. And that's okay. That's kind of messiness. It's the messiness of life.
And that's what this is about. Is everybody a mess?
Everyone's a mess because it's normal. It's very normal. It's good. Messiness is the part of us.
Because it has a pejorative connection to it. I mean, people don't like a mess.
Exactly. So that's why you've got to clean it up. So what I always tell people is it's okay to be a mess, because within the messiness, you repair and you grow. So when we talk about science and messiness and all these things, what we're talking about is that we are experimenting. We are dealing with, this conversation, the relationships you have, everything is kind of new that's coming up. So there's a messiness in that you may get irritated, or you may get frustrated, or you may react incorrectly, or you may react correctly. All of that is kind of messy, but then you evaluate that and you manage it. So if it's messy and it's affecting you, then you clean it up. So we're designed to be messy because that's the think, feel, choose part of us, the ability we have to choose. And sometimes we don't always choose life. Right. And that's very normal as a human, because it's part of that experimental growth process. If you don't get a mess or make a mess, you can't grow, and you can't repair, you can't grow. Yeah. So we've got to give ourselves permission to feel an experience in order to grow and repair. So we've created a very, through religion, through positive psychology, through those kind of the philosophies that are very dominant, are very much, you've got to be in control, you've got to just get through these things, you've got to achieve this external kind. Meanwhile, it's very much an internal thing. It's okay to be, depression is not an evil thing. Depression is a beautiful gift from God. It's a messenger telling you, hey, something's off balance, pay attention. It's calling you to pay attention. And so with a mess is, it's okay to have depression. or feel you can't have. You can feel depression. Depression is not an it. It's not a disease. It's just a warning signal.
Right.
Anxiety is a warning signal. Yeah.
Because people act like it's a flu or something that you catch.
Exactly. Very good analogy. You can't catch depression. You can't have depression. You experience the emotion of depression. It's an emotional warning signal.
Mm-hmm.
And what it is, it's telling you that something's off balance in your wired for love nature. Because our nature is wired for love because we're made in God's image. And we see that in our neurobiology, the mind-brain-body connection, spirit-soul-body connection. It's all geared towards love. That's our core design. So therefore we see that in our biology, in our brain, biology of our brain in our body, and in the mind. That's the psychoneurobiology. So when that's thrown off by a pandemic, by a relational issue, by a work issue, by an argument, by a discussion that made you feel a little bit challenged, that's messy. And you don't quite know, and you're kind of thinking and feeling and choosing, and maybe choosing like this. It's kind of messy, and that's okay. But what we're meant to do is manage that with wisdom. So I always talk about the messy mind and the wise mind. And cleaning up your mental mess is the messy mind talking to the wise mind. And the wisdom is that inner core.
But some people, I've met these people, and their wise mind is estranged from their messy mind.
That's the problem that most of us can experience a lot of the time in our life. So we will go through phases in our life where there's a total estrangement. Then we have these periods where we're totally together, and that's kind of normal. That's all part of life. What we're not doing enough of, which is really where I come in with my work, is being aware of how we're managing our minds. How much time are you
Because we do it on autopilot.
Yes, it becomes, you're quite right, because we get patterns in our life that every experience we have is built through the mind into the brain and becomes a physical tree. That's why I've got these pictures of these trees. So this discussion, for example, is becoming a physical change in your brain that looks like a tree. So we're busy changing your brain because your brain is neuroplastic, and mine, and whoever's watching and listening. This information that I'm speaking, our conversation, this is all information that is being processed by our mind into our brain. And in other words, in your brain and my brain and the listeners' and viewers' brain, these words are becoming protein tree-like structures. And all the little branches and the roots are the memories. So this is a thought about this conversation we're having. And let's say I don't know what you're going to title this, but maybe it's mental health or mind-brain connection or whatever you call it. That would be the name of the thought. Like you get an apple tree and a pear tree. You get a thought tree, and the thought tree has a name. So that's the overarching concept. But this discussion, even though you'll title the discussion, we're talking about a lot of stuff. So there's a lot of data that's going on. And that's all the branches, everything we're saying. But the interesting part here is there's a root system to this tree. So every thought that we are building in response to a discussion, experiences, life, etc., from the time you wake up till the time you go to sleep, the incoming data, which is our conversation, is going into the root system. So the root system is the source, the origin. That's the content, the article you read, the discussion you have. This part above ground is your interpretation of that. So you uniquely interpreting what I am saying through your unique way that you think, feel, and choose. And you are building your unique interpretation into little protein structures above the ground. And what you're hearing is below the ground, and they work together as a whole tree. And then that produces what you say and what you do. So as you apply this information, or as you talk about this information, you're talking from the source plus your interpretation, and that shows up how you are.
Wow. So it's a lot for people to take in.
It is. That's why I use the tree. And if you think of how a tree grows, plant the seed.
Starts with the small.
Starts with the seed.
And then roots. And then you see. So you don't really see your interpretations until the end.
You start seeing them as you're going through. Like right now, we're seeing as you're asking me questions. I'm saying stuff and you are interpreting what I'm saying, and then it's generating your questions. So we're seeing your interpretation of what I'm saying as you ask me questions, as we discuss, as you put forward, whatever, that kind of your own sort of interpretation, or you get an insight or something. That's your interpretation stimulated by what's built into the root system. But this discussion is all not just discussion, it's also physical changes in your brain. The reason you're able to say what you're about to say is because you've actually built this in your brain first. So you've got a protein tree-like structure and it's vibrating. It's got millions of proteins that are vibrating holding the words, then that has then drawn on existing memories in your brain of similar, your experiences, whatever, and all of that's coming together to help you then express, using your brain and body, the next thought. And that process you can control.
I think it's fascinating. And obviously my whole professional life has been around the spirit. I'm a pastor.
Yes.
And when you use words like design, that rings bells with me, because I believe we are designed.
Yeah.
And then I think about quotes like that we have to be transformed by the renewing of our mind. Even though
Brilliant.
the spiritual transformation, a lot of people just talk about heart, but I mean, the real transformation, you get a new heart, but you got to change your mind.
Well, let me throw a curveball there.
Okay.
I believe renewing of the mind is vital. Neuroscientifically, we can renew our mind every 10 seconds. In fact, we're supposed to be. We are designed to, as humans, use our mind to constantly renew our messy mind, which then changes the neural wiring in the brain, because the mind uses the brain to be able to express yourself, and then the brain controls the body, and the mind also controls the body. So when we talk about renewing our mind, we're supposed to be renewing it constantly every 10 seconds.
It's not a moment, it's a process.
It's a process. It's an ongoing lifestyle. So we should be constantly, while we're awake, evaluating what we're saying and our impact of what we're saying, because everything that we're saying is our mind in action, and we need to be evaluating, okay, that's messy, which is okay, but it's messy with an impact, therefore I need to fix it. I need to manage that. Now the ability to say, okay, that's messy, I need to fix it, that's a wise mind. So a wise mind is the co-pilot in the plane, and the messy mind is the pilot, and you're flying through life, and you should be constantly in conversation. But sometimes we ignore the co-pilot to our own detriment, because it then impacts and can build up patterns. But it doesn't matter if you've done that for years, you can always change it, because of the fact that our mind is always changing and our brain can always change. Nothing is fixed. If you do something, mentioned this
but
earlier
a lot of
on.
people think things are fixed.
Exactly, because of the experience of being stuck, and it makes us feel like that's who we are. So what happens is, if we do something repeatedly, or we have a certain pattern that we keep repeating, or we're experiencing the same thing over and over, every experience is solidifying this, and it becomes stronger and stronger. And then over a period, neural wiring, where it wires into the brain, into these proteins change. And right now, the protein trees that you are making, the proteins are very weak. They're very malleable. So they can easily disappear. So if you never do anything with this information, within the next 48 hours, most of what I'm saying is going to go. And there's something about your mind and brain, and that's kind of it. But if you stabilize it
Stabilize it by talking about it,
reading, studying, applying,
sharing,
using it. That's why I've developed the systems in the second half of my book, and I have an app as well called the Neurocycle, which is how you renew your mind. It's exactly how you capture a thought,
that's excellent.
bring it into captivity, and renew your mind. How do you do it? How do you do this every 10 seconds, being aware of what you're doing? And there's a science to it, because science is spiritual. We had this discussion just before we started filming, that science and spirituality are the same side, are the same thing, because God made everything, and science is how it works. So if you think science is bad, then you think God is bad, because God made it. So how this painting was made, I mean, you and I had a whole discussion about this amazing painting. That's science. There's a process involved. As we study more about the brain, as we study more about the body, as we study more about architecture, that is all science.
Yes.
And that's spiritual, because it's the how things work. So when we blend the two, what I've done in my field of science is look at how we can manage our mind. What is the process? So mind management is the term I use for capturing thoughts and renewing the mind.
That's a biblical idea too, yes?
Totally.
Capturing.
It's biblical. It's
thoughts.
In all ancient texts. It's a totally universal concept that we need to...
Buddhists, and they're all talking about...
And you can go back thousands of years to the ancient texts, and you'll see so much depth about how we need to manage our mind. And they didn't at that stage know what the brain did, because they couldn't look inside the body. But there was this thing, that something in the physical. And what they did have right in the ancient text was that our body is very involved. And that's a very new area. It's become very fashionable again. Not fashionable is the wrong word, but people have become very aware again of the impact of body, how our body also stores memories. And it does. because the memory that you and I are building right now, this discussion, is in our mind, which is actually all around us, gravitational fields, electromagnetic light forces, this energy, this think field choose, this almost quantum concept. It's in that, and it's in the brain as a tree, and your DNA is being changed right now as we're speaking. You make a million plus cells every second. All humans do. And every cell that you're making now is gaining this knowledge that we are discussing.
Yeah.
So the cell is different to the cell that you made a second ago and an hour ago. Your cells are different because of the new knowledge you've gained. So our knowledge goes into our body, and this is why when people are traumatized, so the opposite, here's a toxic tree, people have the traumatic experience, then that's the root source over there, but it's distorted. That's why I use this tree. So the experience is not healthy, it's distorted. So it still is processed because you're still experiencing.
Right.
You still respond, you still have a source. There's the abuse or whatever. There's the interpretation of the abuse. This is distorted, therefore this is distorted. All the little branches of the data, the memories, this is the thought tree. Toxic abuse, the trauma, whatever the trauma is, the maybe loss of a loved one, or being in a very bullying environment, or being sexually abused, or whatever.
Right.
This experience is there. Your interpretation of that is there, and then this is how you show up. Now this builds in your brain. It's in your mind, in the energy waves of your mind, and it's in the DNA of every part of your body. So when someone is triggered to recall a trauma, for whatever reason, they feel the response in their body because it's activating all the cells of your body, and they feel it in the brain, and they feel it in the mind. It's all over.
Yeah.
And that's why you got to treat all of those.
Taking this toxic tree.
Yeah.
I can go back, can't I? And
Yes.
and
Rewire.
I can say, no, it doesn't mean that anymore.
Exactly, you can.
I was
Beautiful.
telling somebody the other day,
Statement.
I mean, a marriage and divorce is a great example to me.
Yeah.
Because there's a person that the day I met them was the best day of my life. And then 10 years later, I now look at it as the worst day of my life.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Because
Yes.
I've got a different experience now, and now I've reinterpreted my wedding day.
Exactly, it's been changed.
Right.
It's been reconceptualized.
Yeah.
And you have to almost go through a process of reconceptualizing. Otherwise, there's that sense of disturbance in one. So to become all distorted. But you're quite right in what you said. That was very perceptive, what you said about you can then go and change it. And that's exactly what you have to do. You have to, in order to change this, you don't want to keep these.
Right.
A lot of the work I've done shows if you keep these are real. They're proteins. The DNA changes in your body are mutations. So this is a distortion. Proteins that are folded incorrectly, imbalanced electrochemical nature, there's inflammation, your brain really doesn't like this. So your immune system sends out everything it can to fight this, like it does if you had COVID virus. The COVID virus, or any kind of virus, it sends out this is as real as the COVID virus. People don't get that. When I say that, they do get it. The thought, a toxic issue, whether it's a toxic habit or a toxic trauma, no matter what, whether it's a simple trauma or a complex trauma or a huge trauma, acute trauma, these are real. And your body wants to get rid of them because your psychoneurobiology is wired for survival. This is not survival, this threatens survival. As much as COVID threatens survival, this threatens survival. So you want to eliminate this. So your whole body's tuned to eliminating this. And that's why you feel it in your body. Your body's saying, I've got a sore stomach, I've got GI issues, I'm getting heart palpitations, I've got constant sickness. Those are all telling you, hey, there's something going on in your life.
Because this can lead to... I had 3 funerals during COVID for people who took their own lives.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, so we were fighting one thing, and there was this other thing going on too that was as deadly as the virus.
Even more deadly because your mind is driving everything. Your mind is 90 to 99% of who you are. Your mind is your spirit and your soul. It's the biggest part of you. It's the driving. It's your aliveness. So if that's messy, your body just responds to what your mind's telling it to do. Sure, we can get tumors from exposure to chemicals, and we can have traumatic brain injuries that feed back into the mind and damage the mind. I've done a lot of work in that area when I practice clinically. But our mind is how we manage that. So even with those with the worst traumas, the worst sexual abuse, the worst damage in their brain, I would see them come around when their mind was managed. So when you learn how to deal with that pain, and you recognize you can't push it down, you can't suppress these are volcanic. They will explode like a volcano, and if they don't go away, I mean, if you don't deal with them, the volcano just never dies.
Right.
It just keeps exploding in different ways in your life. But once you deal with them, the volcano runs out of steam.
Yeah. And where does forgiveness work in this?
Well, it's a huge part of it, but you can't forgive and forget. And a lot of people think, okay, I've forgiven and I'm going to forget. There hasn't been a healing. You have to deconstruct and reconstruct. So it comes back to your statement you made earlier, which was very perceptive, which was, if I've got something to deal with it, I've got to kind of reconceptualize it. And you gave the marriage example. You didn't use the word reconceptualize, but you said you've got to literally deconstruct. I think that's the word you may have used. So what's happening when we have an experience? So let's say that there's that marriage, as you fall in love and you get married and the whole, that would be this. Okay, so there's all the experiences, there's lots, there's the marriage, there's so many details there's the source and there's your interpretation. And then things start happening in the marriage that are like little, this happens and that happens, but they're not healthy, they're kind of toxic. So some toxic things start building up around this, and they're building all around us. Imagine a whole lot of toxic things building up around us. So this starts getting kind of overshadowed by all the toxicity. And each of these experiences is first of all in the root. So that's an argument, or that's a misunderstanding, or that's the way one speaks to each other, or whatever. And each time it happens, there's always the source and interpretation. So for example, someone doesn't listen to you, so you interpret that I'm not important enough. And that may not even be what the person meant, but you don't talk about it. And we were leading to the forgiveness concept, and you don't talk about it, so you store that up, and you now have, they don't care enough to listen to me. And then another thing happens in another conversation, more evidence, they don't care, they don't listen. So another conversation that's toxic, that things weren't clear, the person didn't mean not to listen to you, but they did. So there's there's the example, the experience, there's your interpretation, and eventually this builds up that they don't care, they don't listen, there's not whatever. Then that's one of those. Then there's another one that's
and pretty soon that's dead.
It never dies, it just shrinks. Because energy never disappears, energy is transferred. So if I start losing sight of my main thing, which is to love and that work on that initial, and this is where I'm pouring my energy. This is getting smaller and smaller. This is getting bigger and bigger. And because this is a distortion, and all the ones around it, and all the different, each little incident, they are virally, they can't actually totally invade this, but they can certainly overshadow and build a huge, big, imagine a whole lot of trees around this. Then I now have toxicity, I have brain damage. This is literal brain damage. This is your immune system is now saying, get rid of this. This is threatening your psychoneurobiology. We don't have any wiring for this. We don't have, your body
wants
to eliminate.
Yeah.
Like when you have a pussy boil, sorry to use that analogy, but it is an excellent example. The pus is your body trying to expel
get
bacteria.
The poison out.
Exactly. So this is now a poison. And if it's just an initial short-term one, if it's just a little bit of a thing and you sort it out, this won't create major damage. But if you keep it there over periods of 9 weeks, it takes around about 9 weeks for the proteins in this to convert from very malleable, weak proteins to very stable proteins. It doesn't mean a stable protein can't be changed, but it's stable for a reason, because it becomes very dominant, but it can always be changed. And I'll tell you how to change it now. But if you've 1 year into the marriage and you've 2 years into the marriage, you've got many 9-week cycles of practicing these different patterns. So now they've become what we call automatized. Automatization doesn't mean that there's no thinking going on. These are very, very intelligent. Be very intelligent, be brilliant, be exceptionally brilliant as humans. These things are just very dominant, toxic patterns that are thought patterns with all their details that are now very powerful and dominant. So they keep moving from the non-conscious mind into the conscious mind. And so they get triggered in everything, they see each other, conversation, whatever. So they're popping up and they're going down. And this one pops up and then this, and it's influencing. So this becomes how you see your partner as opposed to this.
I think that's a wonderful explanation.
See, so that happens, and then you keep doing that. So they get stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger. Whatever you think about the most will grow. And so in cycles of 63 days, not 21, we all think 21 days build a habit. 63 days builds a habit. And
two full months.
9 weeks basically, minimum. And then if you have multiple cycles of that, it's even stronger. And that's called automatization, a very intelligent, dominant force that has now got a lot of control, influencing.
Where is confession? I mean, positive saying positive, is that the beginning of the process?
No, right at the end. If you do it at the beginning, you're going to be putting, to quote my one friend, a band-aid on a bullet wound. Doesn't work.
Okay.
So, and then the other thing I often say is that if people will take a scripture and will put it on the situation and memorize scripture, you're using God as a genie, and that scripture is a magic potion. That's not how it works.
So it's better if on the front end I say what it really is.
Exactly.
And on the back end, I celebrate a victory or the change, the
transformation.
My confession is.
Yeah. Yes. So that's it. Yes. So it comes in once you know why you're doing it and what's happening. You can't just keep this here and hope this will go away. So you've got this pattern. No amount of positive, my marriage will now work, is going to help you.
Right.
No
so
scripture is
this
going
may
to
be an
until
oversimplification, but feel free to correct me.
Absolutely.
If somebody says, "How was your week?" It's healthier for me to say, "Not great."
Yes.
But you know,
You
I'm
did
going to
this
make the
and
most
this.
of it, or whatever.
That's exactly, you got it perfectly. That is healthy because you are owning it. And as soon as you own it, it means this moves from the non-conscious to the conscious. And whatever was causing the week to be bad is now in the light. And as from a neuroscientific perspective, when you're aware of something, all the protein bonds weaken. Now, if the protein bonds on this structure weaken, the genetic mutations in every cell of our body, and we have 37 to 100 trillion cells in our brain and our body, also become unstable and open to what we call epigenetic factors. So now you can also start changing, a genetic change in our body starts happening, so our body can get healthier. And obviously this is all driven by the mind, so the mind is changing. But if I suppress it, it's stronger than it was before. I close up the door. I seal up. I make the protein bond stronger.
You seal the poison in.
I seal the poison in. Whereas if I say, hey, no, I had a terrible week. I feel my perspective just shifted. It's been a lousy week. It's been this and this and this happened, but that's okay. I own it. And this is what I'm going to do about it. That's the difference. So what we have, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you,
please.
but what we have in the wellness movement and in the religious movement, and I hate to say it like that, but I don't know what other words to use, is don't say it. Confess the positive. Just speak the word over the situation. God is not a genie. Jesus went in the garden and sweated blood and screamed out to God, take the cup away from me. And there's a perfect model of what we're supposed to be doing. If you've had a bad week, get in the garden. Face it, own it, process it. And Jesus processed it. Look at what the process that Jesus went through in the garden. Very, very significant. There's time involved. There's pain involved. It gets worse before it gets better. There's an acknowledgement of the fear. There's a physical sensation in the body of sweating blood, which you can do if you're stressed enough. Jesus experienced everything, depression, anxiety, because those are all emotional warning signals of this terrible thing that Jesus was facing. Yeah. And also we need to go even deeper from the metaphorical down to the actual, and I don't even want to say the word literal, but we need, because none of us can explain what it means to take every single human's experience onto them. None of us understand that. So what it really means is that everything that you could ever experience, or I could ever experience, was experienced that day. So if you've ever felt depression, Jesus felt depression. If you ever felt anxiety, which gives us permission to feel it. But the church is not giving us permission, and nor is the wellness movement, nor is the positive psychology movement. Don't say anything negative. Right. That is the worst thing you can do, because you're sealing in poison.
Yeah,
and it will explode.
I'm fascinated. And if you were listening to one of our experiences on the weekend, you would almost certainly hear me say, whatever you do, don't be religious. Because to me, religion is trying to deny and seal in these flaws that we have, or whatever you want to call it, and it's obsession with behavior modification.
Exactly.
Before you have this transformation,
love it,
is toxic. But the person of Jesus, as you describe it, to me is like he is my model.
That's what we're supposed to be using, and no one uses it. You know that you find the model of Jesus is used more in other religions than it is used in the Christian religion. And when I say the model of Jesus, I'm talking about the model of Jesus in the garden, that humanity that is displayed, that the permission to cry and to scream and to experience those emotions and to
be
own
angry.
them. And to be angry. None of those things are bad. They are all the most beautiful gifts from God, because all of them are telling you something about something that's going inside of you. Just think of it like this. If you are made in love, God is love, so you are made of love. We've had scientists, Nobel Prize winning scientists, saying that our proteins, our cells, every part of our body is wired for love. Quantum physicists showing that we generate these love sine waves when that's our natural nature, and that when we are not managing toxicity, when we're not dealing with trauma, when we're not releasing, in which is really what forgiveness is, we are disrupting that and creating these disturbed wave patterns in our particles, which then translate into damage inside of our cells. I mean, I did telomere research as well, which is a telomere is the end of a chromosome, and chromosomes look like X's. And if you think of an X being the chromosome, my fingernails would be what we call a telomere. And a telomere is very new research, but it's basically the proxy for how we're managing our mind. So how it works is this, it's fascinating.
I feel like I should have studied that more. When I hear all the stuff you know, I feel like, why don't I know this already? But go on.
That's why I'm here to tell. That's why I'm here to tell people. That's why I do what I do. Because people say, "Why are you talking about telomeres in church? Why are you talking about telomeres in a conference?" Because we need to know about it. This is stuff that we all respond to.
Absolutely.
It's something that we can all get our head around, because it's science we shouldn't talk about. It's a great way of understanding.
And when you understand the design of it, it helps you figure out our process.
Exactly.
But tell me about these telomeres.
It also gives you permission to be who you are. It's okay to be a mess. Own it. Own the guilt, but just don't stay there. Own the shame, just don't stay there. And that's the difference between the wellness industry and the religious industry. Is that you're not allowed, you just got to pretend it's not there. Shove it down, suppress it down, whack on some positive affirmations, and then try and go through life. But you can't, because the volcano will explode, whether you like it or not. So essentially the telomeres really are great evidence of that. So the telomere, if I do this little cross again, my fingernails are the telomeres, which are helping with this process of creating 1 million new cells plus every second. That's not the only thing they do, but it's a massive part of what they do. They also contribute a huge amount to the health of the actual chromosome, which then determines the health of the cell. Now, a cell is what makes up your organs, and your organs make up your systems, and your systems make up your body. So we go from, if you go back, and then the telomeres are if you look at a telomere on even the subatomic level, it's basically vibrations of energy. And they're patterns of so every single cell has got its own, and part and particle right down to those levels have their own specific vibrations, which then collapse into these solid particles. And I know this is hard to understand, but there is a scripture.
But you can see it under a microscope.
Exactly, you can. And the quantum research does experiments that show this happening. We don't have technology yet to see a lot of the stuff with the naked eye yet, or even with the technology, but we see the impact and the effect. So it's the invisible becoming the visible. That's what the scripture is. At our base, we are invisible, and there that we're visible at the same time. And that's always been that sort of paradoxical statement. Most people don't quite know what to deal with. But you are as invisible as you are visible right now, looking at me.
That's powerful.
It is powerful. And when you recognize that, and you recognize that what drives that invisible to the visible is our connection with the Spirit of God, which is the religious way of saying it, but the science way, which is also spiritual, is that that's our energy force. We plugged into the energy source. Without that, there's nothing. So that's what's driving all of this up to your unique translation of that into you and me and everyone else. So when you are, where were we? When you are at the point where you are, we were deconstructing this, we were talking about how you break this down. Over time, this thing builds up. What we need to, that then manifests as patterns. But because we've gone through these cycles of 63 days plus, we're so used to this. It's become familiar. And the familiar is a comfort zone. So we hang on to the familiar, even though it's an unsustainable coping mechanism. So in the time of a trauma, we have a response. This is not always sustainable, but it's what you could do in that moment to cope. So it's maybe one of the 4 different flight, freeze, fawn, and that's got a million different ways that you can do that. That was sustainable for the moment, to cope, to survive. You have a relationship with it to be able to cope. That then manifests in these signals. because these are disruptive to the brain and the body. They are causing brain damage. We wired for love, which comes full circle back to what we were saying. So our body is saying, okay, you've had this, but you have to do something about this. So let me tell you to do something by letting you feel depression, letting you feel there's the little warning signals, there's depression, there's anxiety, there's pain in your heart, there's your perspective is changing, life sucks, you're complaining, your behavior, you can't relate.
Those are
properly.
flashing lights.
Flashing lights. So there's 4 categories of those flashing lights that your body is trying to expel the pus. And if we ignore those by slapping on a positive affirmation or a scripture, you are going to have an explosion. But if you say, okay, I will listen, I will see these for what they are. There's no shame because I'm amazing. Life has happened.
Right.
I'm doing stupid things.
You're a work of art.
Exactly. Work of art that has had stuff happen. When you do that, it takes all the pressure off. It means that you as a leader of many people and people look up to you, you can be authentic and honest. You don't have to pretend that everything's okay because it's not okay, because that's a lie. And that's not giving your followers permission to be who they are, and then you could perpetuating a problem. But if you're authentic and you say, hey, I'm battling, I had a bad week, I've had a bad this, but this is what I'm doing about it. Now here's the key. We own it, but we do something about it.
You don't just
camp
there.
You don't camp there. And that's what people do a lot of camping. They'll get to the point, I can own, and that's a huge step. Just do what I'm saying, just to say it's okay to feel this. But then you can't get stuck there and go round and round, moan and complain and complain. You're going to complain to a point, but then Jesus didn't get stuck in one part of the garden.
Right.
Jesus progressed through the garden.
I like that, yeah.
And then Jesus turned to the disciples and said, hey, don't get me, he didn't ask for Prozac, he didn't ask for opioids, he didn't ask get me out of here. He didn't ask to swap places. He just said, can you support me? He didn't say, can you fix me? Support.
I love that.
So you can't fix any of your people that follow you, nor can I. As a therapist, I can't fix. All I can do is support you in your journey and use my wise mind to give you perspective. And you can use your wise mind to give me perspective.
What a fabulous way to conclude this. We said it's art, and you commented on this piece of art.
I love it.
And what the thought that occurred to me, I saw this being made, and it was
incredible.
Paint everywhere.
A mess.
A mess. Now this finished
is exquisite.
It's exquisite, but the mess is what made it.
Exactly. That's it. That's why I say clean up a mental mess.
Right.
And we can do that all the time.
That's how I connect with this.
Yeah, that's a beautiful analogy. And that brings in the forgiveness thing, because you asked about that. It brings in, part of our mess is forgiving ourselves. It really starts with that. What does forgiveness really mean? It doesn't just mean I pretend and I'm going to, if someone abused you and raped you, you're not even going to learn a lesson from that. You're just going to heal from that. What you want to do is disentangle. What they did, that can never be seen as okay. It's not okay. It's never okay. But if you live with that trauma, you entangled. So in quantum physics, we have a law called quantum entanglement. And that means if two particles are put into a relationship, no matter how far apart they are, if one spins this way, this one will spin this way as well. Einstein called this the ghost in the machine. He did not like, and some of his contemporaries, he did not like this philosophy at all, although accepted it, because it doesn't explain, because at that point science was, in order for something to impact something, it has to physically touch. But quantum physics shows us that you don't have to physically touch. So you can have someone that's abused you who lives in another country, thousands and thousands of miles away from you. And if you haven't yet released, and I like to use the word release because there's so much religion around the word forgive. If you haven't released, you're still connected. You're still plugged in, like a computer's plugged into a power source in the wall. Yes. You're still plugged in. So we see in quantum physics that until that separation, once in a relationship, you can't get them out of a relationship until you change the relationship. So once you transform the relationship, it becomes different. So what you want to do is disentangle. So when you recognize the pattern and you do the deconstructing, you get in the garden. Recognizing the pattern gets you in the garden. In the garden, processing through, you are identifying how you think, feel, and choose. You're identifying this part, your interpretation, which then takes you to the source, what happened. Yeah. And then you're going to take that and say, okay, well, it's happened. You can't change what's happened, but you can change what's in you. This is the big thing. You can't change what's happened. It's happened. So now I can start changing what's in me. In doing that, I'm going to be releasing and disconnecting and changing the relationship. This is toxic. Something that's
you become
toxic,
a different person.
You transform. So the process is embrace, process, and reconceptualize. And that's what I spent 38 years researching.
Give those one more time. Embrace,
process, reconceptualize. So embrace is get in the garden. Process is go through the garden, sweat the blood,
So
scream,
good.
shout, and then reconceptualize. In the second part of that book, I give the scientific 5-step technique that I've clinically trialed, used in clinical practice.
People need to get this book.
How to do it. So,
This is so good.
thank you.
Thank you. Anything else you want to know? You want these folks to know before you leave?
I just think that to realize that your mind never stops, and that your mind is never, and that you can actually manage your mind. And how you manage your mind is that you've got these two elements. You've got the messy mind, and it's totally okay to have the messy mind. Just step into the wise mind and let the pilot fly with the co-pilot and start listening. And then you can start managing your mind. So you can't change what's happened to you, but you can change what's happened in you. And you can therefore change how it plays out into your future. And that's reconceptualization. That's kind of a summary.
You've made me a better person.
That's very kind of you. Thank you. You asked incredible questions.
Oh, thank you.
And I got blessed by this.
Oh, good. Thanks for joining us. Blessings.